9. The Savior Returns. Written by Celestial Rainstorm. Narrated by AJ the Elementalgod. Chapter 22. Relatively Calm. For the last time, Seven. No! 9 said, a bit irritated at the female stitchpunk. She gave him a small smack on his forehead with her palm. Aggravated, he flinched as she struck him. "You are going to let 5 and 2 hear you, and that's the end of it," 7 said firmly, as if speaking to a stubborn child. Her brow furrowed in agitation as she kneeled in front of him. 9 sighed for what seemed like a millionth time that day, jadedly rubbing his brow. 7, I told you. Just wait. Just wait, he said as he fixed her with a pleading gaze. He was too exhausted to be irritated anymore. Why? You are in serious pain, and I don't want... She trailed off, paused for a beat, then quickly corrected herself. We don't want to lose you. Let 2 and 5 help you. Please, 9, she pleaded, clutching his shoulder and giving him a tight squeeze. He closed his eyes and sighed again, leaning back against the pillow with a small, shuddering groan of pain. No, I have a plan. We'll be able to do this, just... he said, trying to find the right words, not meeting her gaze. He couldn't tell her what his real intentions were. The whole group would try to stop him. He didn't want to think of what 7 would say. 9, 7 began, but he raised his hand and placed his index finger gently on her lips. She stopped speaking, looking down in extreme concern for her friend. I'm fine. Please stop worrying, 9 said, opening his fingers and offering the hand to her. Her brow furrowed as she looked down at his hand. Saw how hard it shook. She placed her fingers in his, safe and reassuring. It will be okay, he said soothingly, weakly squeezing her hand. 7 returned the pressure and sighed tiredly. 9 was nearly as stubborn as she was, and she knew she couldn't argue with him any longer. Besides, she didn't want to stress him. He needed to save whatever strength he had left in his body. She then sat beside him, still holding his hand tightly. She tucked herself into his warm body, resting her head against his shoulder. 7 then closed her eyes, wishing the war was over. 9 blinked, but allowed her to nestle next to him. He still had her hand tightly and hesitantly rested his head on top of her skull. He would miss her. He didn't want to carry out his plan, but there was no other possible way to end the war and keep her, safe. 9 bit his lower lip. It wasn't fair, but he knew what he must do. He squeezed her hand again, patting her arm gently with his other hand. His very heart was so confused, waging war within him, that he could not win. 7. Hey, 7? Can I see you for a moment? 5 then called from across the way. He was peering around the corner and waving to 7, beckoning her to come. She released 9's hand and got to her feet swiftly and gracefully. She sprinted towards the mechanic, light and elegant. 9 watched the warrior running across the way, and something came over him. Something he suddenly realized, something he had kept inside himself for so long. He wanted to leap to his feet and cry after her, something he had finally admitted to himself. 7 had been his everything for the time between the death of the others and the resurrection. She has been his best friend, one he could talk to and cry his pain to. She was so protective, so beautiful, so brave. I love her. The 3 words in his mind were so simple, but they meant something so much stronger. He wished that he could run up to her, embrace her, and tell her all he felt for her. Nine had loved her with all of his heart, ever since he first set eyes upon the fearsome warrior. She was beautiful, brave, fierce, and kind. She had been beside Nine through everything, and was his very dearest friend. He cried in front of her, and she had hugged him like she had was never going to let him go. He'd made her laugh even when everybody else felt down. He'd forgiven him, and told him that she'd always be his friend, no matter what. But he knew he couldn't. He wouldn't endanger their friendship attempting to tell Seven how he felt. Nine slumped down against his pillow, blinking. He knew that no matter what, he would protect and care for Seven with his life. He'd never let her go. He'd always be there for her as much as he could be, but he knew he could never destroy the feelings he had for the warrior, no matter how hard he would try. So much had rushed into his mind. So much he wanted to say to her. So much he wanted to tell her before his time was finally up. Each day, his time was ticking away like each of his limited heartbeats. Nine knew that he could not tell Seven how he felt. They could not devote their attention to something as foolish as love when they were in a war to be fought. The thought saddened him, and he bent his head, closing his eyes. He suddenly thought of something that he swore he'd forgotten. It was a picture of a book that he had once read. When Seven and the twins were alone, a picture of a man and a woman at the end of the novel shared an odd but fascinating gesture. It was called a kiss. Nine knew this affectionate gesture was used between humans who loved one another. He was familiar with kissing. Each night before he bedded down, Nine gave a gentle kiss to 3 and 4's forehead. But he also knew there was different types of kisses, as there were different kinds of love. It was something he had once wanted to do with Seven, just once, but never even dared to ask her. So it had crept into the back of his mind, never to be thought of again. Had been sleeping in an ancient cobwebs at the corner of his mind. Their forgotten things rested. Nine reached up and touched his rough burlap lips with his fingertips, wondering. A kiss between them would mean affection, love, adoration, everything he felt for her, and then some. He sighed to himself, allowing his hand to drop as he stared at his surroundings. The floor was still solid and smooth, warm light coming from the lanterns nailed to the walls. 8 and 2 had lit each one for a little bit of warmth. Old dusty rugs decorated the floor, and each of the furniture from the humans who once owned the cabin still remained. It was actually quite beautiful. It would make a lovely home for them, if only they could stay. Nine closed his eyes and leaned back, thinking of his future, or lack thereof, and the kin that he would have to leave behind. A few ways away, Seven walked up to 5. The two stood behind a corner where Nine couldn't see or hear them. "Are you sure you're okay?" 5 asked persistently. Pressing the question, he raked his skillful eye over her body, not willing to believe her. He had been checking everyone for injuries and healing any who needed it during the rare respite from the war. She rolled her eyes in a loving expression for her friend. "You're almost as bad as he is," she said, gesturing over her shoulder in a direction where Nine lay. "And you're almost as stubborn as he is," 5 retorted. Worry obviously etched into his timbre voice. "He still won't let me heal him. I can't figure it out. He has to be in terrible pain, but he just won't. He can barely move, let alone fight these monsters," 5 said, brow furrowed as he wrung his hands. 7 sighed, biting her lower lip. "I don't know. It's really worrying me," she said, bending her head. She felt so confused. Why did she just want to lie out? Why did he just want to lie out there suffering? A sudden thought occurred to her. Turning to 5, she pointed to 9. Go and talk to him. Reason with him. You're his best friend. He'll listen to you. Go tell him that you're going to heal him, and he can't tell you otherwise. He's suffering, and I can't stand it any longer, she said to 5, giving him a small push on the shoulder to urge him on. He won't listen to me, he told her, as they parted to go their separate ways. 7 went to check on the twins who were nearby. They were curiously cataloging a large leather-bound book, while 2 watched the curious golden eyes. 5 looked after her and blinked once. He knew too well. He then turned away and walked towards 9. Hey, 9, 5 said, approaching him and sitting beside him. 9, who had gone back to staring at the ceiling, shot a look of tired contempt at him. "7 sent you out here to try to convince me to let you heal me," he guessed, and his voice monotone. "You know, you're too smart for your own good." To this 9 didn't answer. Instead, he turned his back to 5, unable to face him. Oh, 7. Well, you can tell her I'm not going to. Not until all this is finished, he replied, closing his eyes and burying himself even further into his nest of blankets and pillows. 9, that's irrelevant. You're suffering over here. You want to battle this machines like this? It's almost a guarantee that you'll... 5 trailed off, the desperation in his voice obvious. He couldn't find the sentence. He didn't want to consider the alternative. 9 sighed sadly, struggling to sit up once more. 5 grasped his arm and helped him onto a semi-sitting position. The younger of the 2 men sighed again. He turned to face 5, speaking softly and yet firmly. 5, you know I'm banged up pretty badly. It would take a long time just for me to be completely healed, and a really long time for me to recover. What if the machines attack while I'm being healed? We're lying here useless. Every second we're in danger. We're never safe. I will let you heal me after this is over. But right now, I'm not going to risk you or 2 or any of the others. Besides, if I can still protect you all, then that's what I'm going to do, 9 argued, clasping 5's shoulder tightly. The older Stitchpunk stared at his friend, then sighed and relented. In a way, 9 was right. The entire coven would be in danger if you underwent the intense, extensive surgery that it would take him to heal. Okay, but promise me that the second the machine is dead, you'll let me heal you, 5 said firmly. 9 nodded in agreement before looking away from 5, his hand sliding from his shoulder. He blinked in curiosity. His single brow furrowed. Reaching forward, he clasped 9's hand in his own. 9, what's wrong? He asked softly. The younger Stitchbone kept his eye averted, shaking his head slightly. I just don't know what to do. I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. Putting them in danger like that? Bringing you back up here? Up there, you were safe. But bringing you back made the machine beast come after us. I got myself captured and it took the talisman and woke the machine. 9 trailed off, burying his head in his hands. 5 blinked and was silent for a moment before reaching forward and reassuringly rubbing 9's numbered back. Don't ever think that bringing us back was a mistake. Sure, we were safe, but we weren't free. We were trapped in a forever darkness, an emptiness that never ended. Without you, we never would have been able to come home. Now we have a chance to defeat the machines together. We're all still here, aren't we? It's all thanks to you. Without you, most of us would probably be dead, and the machine would be at large. You are doing the right thing, 9. 5 said gently, looking up at him. Remember that the scientists created us for a purpose. We were created to make sure that the world would be safe after the humans were all gone. And we are doing just that thanks to you. We will be able to live out our lives, and we will win this war. We just have to keep the hope. 5 finished, clasping 9's shoulder. 9 gave 5 a faint smile to the man who had never failed to guide him in the right direction. However, the smile quickly disappeared from his face, and he looked down sadly. What is it? Are you alright? Maybe you need some more rest. 5 asked worryingly, and 9 quickly shot him a glance of reassurance. No, it's just Sev. 9 finished weakly, not knowing how to continue. He felt as if he was about ready to explode from hiding his feelings any longer, especially about her. On one hand, he would feel so much better if his best friend knew how he felt. On the other, if 5 let it slip to 7, then both she and 9 would be in extreme danger. 9 truly didn't want to risk it, but he knew he had absolute trust in 5. 9, what about her? 5 said, holding up a hand in question. 9 blinked, fidgeting with his zipper, as decision tore him apart. There was still time to salvage this before he said too much. Nothing, it's nothing. Really, never mind. 9 said quickly, hoping to divert 5's attention instead of letting the subject go. 5 placed a hand on 9's back, his expression gentle. You're afraid, aren't you? He said softly. You're afraid to tell her that you love her. 9 stared, feeling as if he'd been electrocuted again. He turned to gape and stare at 5 in disbelief. He had known. He had known this whole time. What? How did you? 9 asked desperately, his soprano voice an octave higher than normal. 5 couldn't help but chuckle softly, amused over poor 9's shock. He faced his friend, eye and smile warm and understanding. 9, you're my best friend. Ever since you met her, I knew. It was the way you looked at her. 5 said, still smiling. And it's okay. It's wonderful. However, 9 still didn't return the grin or happy words. Instead, he shrugged 5's hand from his shoulder and turned away. He blinked, a bit shocked at his friend's reaction. It's not okay. If she ever found out, I would lose her. She doesn't like me the way I like her. If I told her, we would both be in extreme danger. It would get in the way, distracting both of us. I have to keep her safe, no matter what I have to do. If I have to keep this to myself, then so be it. Besides, it's just a foolish feeling. It doesn't matter. 9 said bitterly, not looking at 5. The one-eyed Sishpun shook his head at 9. 9, you're not the one with the only one eye, so you have no excuse of being blind as you are being. What? I've learned that love is something that is very strong. Just look at us. If we didn't realize that we needed each other, and realize that what we truly have, then we never would have made it through alive. It's the one thing the machines don't have. They don't and they can't love anything. It's their weakness, not ours. Instead of thinking of it will make you weak, think it will make you stronger. Use your love for her, for them, to keep going, to keep fighting. Then we'll all make it through then. Maybe you can tell her yourself. 5 said gently, tilting his head and looking in 9's face. 9 blinked and looked back at his friend. He couldn't find the right words for 5. The old Shishpung then patted his back and got to his feet. You're exhausted. Rest a little. I'll come to check you in a few, okay? He began to walk away towards the room, where 2 and the twins were staying nearby. Thank you, 5. 9 called out for him. 5 paused, then turned around. He gave 9 a wide, loving smile. He turned back and rounded the corner. 9's eyes lingered for 5 for a moment. Then he lay against the pillows, exhausted. 5 walked away. A shadow figure against the wall. He was quickly approaching him. Claws clacking against the floor. The male stitch punk whipped around, startled. He grasped his crossbow tightly in his hands, finger in the trigger. Nothing would touch his friends, especially the injured burlap stitch punk. 5 tensed, ready for a threat that was quickly approaching. However, as it did so, the shadow quickly became smaller and smaller until the familiar figure of 1 emerged, behind a large stack of books. His sinister eyes were narrowed as he brandished his staff angrily at 5. Put that thing away, boy. You're gonna get someone killed, 1 hissed, giving a pass with his hand. 5 blinked and felt his cheeks burn. He quickly unloaded his crossbow and sheathed the unused arrow. 1 passed by 5, Cave brushing against him. He followed him as the 2 headed for the room nearby where everybody was bedding down for the night. They passed by 9, who was already in deep sleep. 5 looked on in relief, knowing that he could finally escape the pain in a few hours. However, 1 was looking down at the young man in contempt. Stupid boy, putting himself in danger, risking his life like that, not allowing the danger to pass over. 1 muttered bitterly to himself as he watched 9 sleep. 5 looked over him, feeling something rather unfamiliar roar inside of him. He didn't know what exactly happened in those moments, but without feeling 1 bit of fear towards his leader, 5 turned to 1 and held up an accusing finger. He is probably the bravest of us all. He risked his life for us. Don't you know how guilty he felt as we died in the first place? He only tried to make up for that and keep us safe. He cares for each and every single one of us, even you. Why do you think he stopped 7 from trying to kill you? He shouted in a fierce whisper. The older Stitchpunk was far too stunned to reply. He had expected the stubbornness from 7 and 9, but never from the measly coward. He was nothing but a meek boy who always followed the rules. Empowered, 5 continued on. You know, 1, even though you've never showed that you care about 9, he has for you in everything he's done. It's not fair that you keep breaking him down all the time because he tries to change or challenge things and change things for the better. Yes, you kept us safe for a long time, but we were avoiding the real purpose. You know, I used to think that I didn't have a purpose. I was never brave or ready to fight. But 9 made me realize that I am needed, like we all are. You too, 1. Not one of us is a hindrance on the other, and you need to realize that. 5 finished, staring heatedly at 1. The older Stitchpunk was stunned and could not find the right words to say. He was absorbing the words the guide had just said to him, words he'd never even thought of. As he stood there, shocked, realization came crashing down upon him. 5 stared at him. Brow burrowed. He stood tall, no longer afraid of 1. The older had no authority over him now. They were in the middle of a war, and 9 had been right. They need to work together or else they all be doomed. 1 opened his mouth to say something, but instead only lowering his eyes and turning away. He walked slowly into the room where the others bedded down, completely silent. 5 looked after him, almost unable to believe what he had just done. He had finally stood up to the one who tyrannized him for all those years. It left him exhilarated, but also strangely drained, like it had taken all of his energy. He then looked over his shoulders to where Nine lay, wondering if their arguing had woke him up. He was still completely oblivious, too deeply asleep to hear a thing. Five glanced back at the room where the others slept. He then turned away. He walked to Nine, who was sleeping, nestling deeply in his blankets. Five carefully laid down beside him, keeping a close watch over his best friend. He reached out, gently resting his hand on Nine's shoulder. He just hoped that he could hold on until the war was over, and that they could make it out together. Nine closed his eye and lay down, folding his arms underneath his head. Soon he was sound asleep and snoring softly. As the night darkened, Seven creeped out into the drawing room. Everyone else was deeply asleep. The twins were curled up together, nestled with 2 and 6. She snuck slightly towards the place where Nine was resting. She wanted to be beside him, to make sure he was going to be all right. As she came up upon him, she smiled softly, as she saw that Five was already laying beside him, making sure that Nine was all right. The female stitchpunk lay down on Nine's other side, keeping close. From the doorway of the other room, one watched silently, through solemn eyes. He had never realized the strength of their bond between the 3 stitchpunks. And it was the reason he was here, alive today. Perhaps they were all right, and a time of change was coming over all. The end of chapter 22.